Everybody, welcome back to ATM 5, Our Changing Atmosphere. In today's lecture, we're talking about ozone and the ozone hole. The ozone layer is an incredibly important part of the atmosphere that shields us from damaging and carcinogenic ultraviolet radiation. Over the past 60 years, emissions from human activity were responsible for puncturing a hole in the ozone layer. However, in this case, we were able to rally around a solution, stop the damage, and have been working on helping the ozone layer heal ever since. In this section, we're going to define Dobson Units, chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, Ozone Hole, and Montreal Protocol. The questions we're going to ask are, what is the role of the ozone layer? How is ozone naturally produced and destroyed? What role do CFCs play in ozone destruction? And how did we react to the discovery of the ozone hole? A brief history of the discovery of ozone and the ozone layer is here. German chemist Christian Schonbein in 1840 first suggested the existence of ozone. Following electrical discharges in the air, he identified a peculiar odor that he named after the Greek word ozine, meaning to smell. In the early 20th century, Charles Fabry and GmbH Dobson independently conducted experiments that yielded quantitative measurements showing the existence of an ozone layer in the upper atmosphere. The fundamental chemical reactions then responsible for this ozone layer were then proposed by Chapman in 1930. As discussed earlier in class, this ozone layer can be found between 20 and 30 kilometers altitude in the lower stratosphere. This region of relatively high ozone concentration is responsible for absorbing a particular type of ultraviolet radiation from the sun, leading to warming of the local atmosphere. Thus, we see an increase in temperature as we ascend from the tropopause at about 10 to 15 kilometers altitude to the stratopause at around 50 kilometers altitude. Consequently, the ozone layer can be said to be the primary driver of temperature increase through the stratosphere. Recall from our discussion of the electromagnetic spectrum that individual photons of light can be described by a single parameter known as its wavelength. When wavelength is short, the photon carries a lot of energy. When wavelength is long, the photon is carrying less energy. Solar radiation consists of light from across the electromagnetic spectrum, with approximately 7% of light from ultraviolet and above, 44% from visible, 37% from near infrared, and 11% from far infrared. That 7% of ultraviolet radiation carries enough energy to potentially damage plant and animal cells. For humans, this higher energy radiation can cause moles, lesions, and even skin cancer. Fortunately, the highest energy radiation from the sun is absorbed well before reaching the surface. Oxygen gas, consisting of 2 oxygen atoms, is our first line of defense, responsible for absorbing the highest energy solar radiation. Ozone, which consists of 3 oxygen atoms, is a less stable configuration of oxygen, and one that is able to absorb lower energy ultraviolet radiation just outside the visible spectrum. Together, these gases are primarily responsible for shielding us from dangerous ultraviolet radiation. Ultraviolet, or UV radiation, is normally classified as UVA, UVB, or UVC radiation, from least energetic to most energetic. UVC radiation is entirely blocked in the atmosphere at and above the ozone layer. UVB radiation tapers in intensity below the ozone layer, so only a fraction of incident radiation makes its way to the surface. UVA radiation, the lowest energy form of UV radiation, can largely pass through the atmosphere with minimal absorption. This infographic gives us some information on the differences between these types of ultraviolet radiation. UVA radiation accounts for 95% of the UV radiation that reaches the Earth's surface, and is commonly used in tanning beds to produce a slightly singed appearance on your skin. It is able to penetrate to the second layer of skin, and as such can contribute to sun damage, including wrinkles and premature aging. In rare cases, it can cause sufficient damage to be carcinogenic, but is effectively blocked completely by any over-the-counter sunscreen. Although it only represents 5% of total UV radiation that makes it to the surface, UVB radiation is a more dangerous form of ultraviolet radiation that primarily affects the top layer of skin and causes most sunburns. Exposure to UVB is strongly associated with skin cancer, since it is of sufficiently high energy to actually damage the DNA of your skin. Unprotected skin exposed to UVB radiation can burn in as little as 15 minutes. UVC radiation does not reach the Earth's surface, as it's absorbed high up in the atmosphere by oxygen and ozone. As such, it is not normally considered a risk factor for skin cancer, although it is emitted from man-made sources such as mercury lamps and welding torches. The ozone layer is a boon to us on the surface. It largely protects us against UVB and UVC radiation, the highest energy forms of ultraviolet light, and the flavors of UV radiation most likely associated with skin damage. The Earth's atmosphere features an ozone layer between approximately 20 and 30 kilometers altitude, where ozone concentrations rise to around 10 to 15 parts per million. At 15 times its nominal concentration, ozone in the ozone layer provides an important barrier against incoming ultraviolet radiation. Ozone can also be found in the near surface, a type of ozone known as photochemical ozone. Near the surface, ozone is considered a pollutant, and one that is often measured as part of air quality monitoring. Ozone can cause damage to vegetation or respiratory tract irritation and damage when breathed in. The ozone in the near surface is produced in the presence of nitrogen oxides normally emitted as a consequence of human activity. The amount of ozone above a particular location on Earth is usually represented in terms of Dobson units. This is effectively the height of a column of ozone in millimeters if we were to extract all the ozone above a point and bring it down to the surface at standard temperature and pressure. A healthy ozone layer, one that is able to block out most UVB and UVC radiation, is between 240 and 500 Dobson units. The concentration of ozone is roughly in balance in much the same way the Earth is in energy balance. That is, ozone stays constant because the rate of creation of ozone is approximately equal to the rate of destruction of ozone. Consequently, the density of ozone doesn't change. Ozone is naturally produced in the stratosphere when oxygen gas is hit by high-energy ultraviolet radiation. A sufficiently high-energy photon can disassociate or break apart the oxygen gas into two free oxygen atoms. These oxygen atoms can then hitch onto oxygen gas molecules to form the triatomic ozone molecule. To balance the number of oxygen atoms, the overall reaction converts 3 oxygen gas molecules into 2 ozone molecules. Ozone destruction occurs when a high-energy photon delivers enough energy to the ozone molecule to break off the spare oxygen atom. If that spare oxygen atom then collides with an ozone molecule, it will steal the third oxygen atom to make oxygen gas and leave behind another oxygen gas molecule. The result is that 2 ozone molecules produce 3 oxygen gas molecules. Together, the creation and destruction process of ozone is known as the Chapman cycle, or Chapman process. When the rate of creation of ozone equals the rate of destruction, then ozone will remain at a constant density. The vertical profile of ozone can be understood in terms of the Chapman process. Creation of ozone requires ultraviolet radiation and oxygen gas. The former, UV radiation, is available in greater quantities the higher you get in the atmosphere. The latter, oxygen gas, is available in higher concentrations closer to the surface, where the atmosphere is more dense. Consequently, there must be a point in between where conditions are optimal for ozone production, and that point just happens to be around 20 to 30 kilometers altitude. However, with the invention of chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, humans introduced a new, highly efficient pathway for ozone destruction. CFCs are entirely synthetic molecules created using atoms of carbon, chlorine, and fluorine under lab conditions. They were manufactured because of their utility in aerosol sprays, blowing agents for foams and packing materials, solvents, and as refrigerants. In addition, they were non-toxic and non-flammable, as the inventor demonstrated when he inhaled a canister of CFC and used it to blow out a candle without any harmful effects to himself. Although they were intended to only be used in closed industrial processes, it was inevitable that they would eventually escape into the atmosphere. When they did, and when the natural dynamical patterns of the atmosphere carried them high into the stratosphere, they were broken apart by sunlight into their constituent atoms. The chlorine atoms from CFC then went on to form chlorine gas that provided an alternative pathway for ozone destruction. To see this in more detail, we start at the top of this diagram with CFCs that have just made their way into the stratosphere. The highly energetic UV radiation available in this region is able to break the CFC apart, allowing a chlorine atom to escape into the stratosphere. If the chlorine atom then hits an ozone molecule, it can steal away the third oxygen atom to produce chlorine monoxide. If a free oxygen atom then bumps into the chlorine monoxide, it can steal away the oxygen atom to produce oxygen gas and leave behind the chlorine atom. The chlorine atom is then free to further destroy more ozone. This alternative pathway for ozone destruction increases the rate at which ozone is destroyed, upsets the balance between creation and destruction, and subsequently drives down the atmosphere's overall ozone concentration. Because of their immense utility for air conditioning, refrigeration, and other industrial processes, CFC concentration in the atmosphere has greatly increased from the point of their invention and adoption. Here we see a measurement of atmospheric concentration of CFC 113, one such CFC molecule. From their invention in the 1930s, atmospheric concentration saw an effectively exponential rise. Ozone destruction via CFCs has been particularly apparent over Antarctica because of the unique photochemistry of the Antarctic stratosphere. The combination of very cold winter temperatures and lack of photochemistry during the winter create the unique conditions needed for the production of chlorine gas from CFCs. Due to the lack of sunlight over the Antarctic, temperatures drop in the stratosphere during the southern hemisphere winter season. At very cold temperatures, below negative 80 degrees Celsius, certain chemical reactions involving CFCs in the presence of ice can cause an increase in the concentration of chlorine gas. When sunlight returns, it splits the chlorine gas into two chlorine radicals, the chemical equation being Cl2 plus sunlight equals 2Cl. The free chlorine atoms then rapidly accelerate ozone depletion in accordance with the cycle on the previous slide. It is this unique chemistry that occurs in the Antarctic stratosphere at cold temperatures that enhances the production of chlorine gas, and so enhances the destructive potential of each CFC molecule. In this plot on the right, we see three vertical profiles of ozone concentration. The blue line shows the 1967 to 1971 average ozone concentration in October and September, exemplary of a healthy ozone layer with about 284 Dobson units of ozone. The green line shows ozone concentration on October 7, 1986, as destruction of the ozone layer was accelerating in response to higher CFC concentrations. Total ozone in the column was only 148 DU, already well below the historical average. The red line shows ozone concentration on October 2, 2001, when effectively zero ozone was found between 14 and 20 kilometers altitude. Total column ozone was only around 116 Dobson units, a state exemplary of the ozone hole. By definition, an ozone hole occurs whenever the total column ozone, that is, the total amount of ozone above a particular location, drops below 220 Dobson units. This plot shows the total southern hemisphere ozone hole area over time. As discussed earlier, the ozone hole forms around September, when the sun finally rises in the Antarctic spring and provides the needed energy to disassociate chlorine gas. The chlorine radicals then go on to destroy the ozone layer, building a larger and larger hole. Over the past several decades, the ozone hole has covered an area of around 20 million square kilometers, largely centered over the Antarctic continent. In 2019, anomalously warm temperatures in the Antarctic summer led to a reduction in the ice chemistry needed for CFCs to turn into chlorine gas, thus leading to a smaller ozone hole. Into December and November, warmer temperatures over Antarctica reduce its isolation from the general circulation and allow mixing with air from the lower latitudes. This shuts down the enhanced ozone depletion process and leads to closure of the ozone hole. Here we see a time series of snapshots showing the October ozone concentration over the southern hemisphere for years since 1980. Prior to 1979, ozone levels below 220 Dobson units were not observed in this region. The blue color indicates the 220 level, with purple to pink indicative of the ozone hole. As we see, the overall shape of the ozone hole changes over time, depending on the dynamical conditions at the time. Further, over this time period, the intensity of the ozone hole was increasing as well. Over the period from 1960 to 1991, measurements of total ozone on the edge of the Antarctic continent showed a steady decline from healthy levels. Whereas in the 1960s, over 300 Dobson units were typically observed, by 1990, levels were closer to 120 Dobson units. Global atmospheric models have been used to forecast and project stratospheric ozone concentrations. Even models from several decades before have shown considerable skill in predicting ozone column amounts. Here we see one such model estimate for September 11th, 1994, which shows good agreement with observations on the right. With these models in hand, we're able to predict the future of atmospheric ozone. If CFC production was continued unabated, the destruction of the ozone layer would extend far beyond Antarctica. Here we see snapshots of modeled ozone concentrations over time over the North American continent. In the top left, we see 1974, a relatively healthy ozone layer. CFC buildup in 1994 was already causing destruction of ozone in this region and a weakening of the ozone layer. This weakening would continue through 2009, 2020, 2040, and 2060. By 2040, the entire globe would effectively be a single ozone hole with concentrations below 220 Dobson units. And by 2060, we would anticipate near global loss of stratospheric ozone. The consequences for this latter image would be widespread devastation to ecosystems and civilization, as the surface would no longer be protected from harmful UVB radiation. In light of these dire predictions, the 1987 Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer was adopted globally to combat the ozone destruction potential of CFCs. This international treaty provided limits on the production and consumption of substances that can cause ozone depletion. Since its adoption, new technological advances allowed production and consumption of ozone-depleting substances to be reduced more rapidly than prescribed by the Montreal Protocol. Focused efforts by industry have enabled substantial progress to date on phasing out ozone-depleting substances to surpass national and international policies. CFC alternatives, including HCFCs and HFCs, have also provided the opportunity to safely accelerate the phase-out of CFCs without disrupting the societal benefits derived from CFC products. This slide shows the main provisions of the Montreal Protocol, along with the London, Copenhagen, Montreal, and Beijing addendums. They set two timelines, one for developed countries and one for developing countries, for the freeze on consumption of these chemicals and for their phase-out from use in industrial processes. As a consequence, CFC concentration in the stratosphere has trended downward from its peak around the year 2000. The drop in concentration of these destructive substances has been around 10% as of 2020. Future projections, based on anticipated atmospheric lifetimes of these substances, show a slow but steady decline in their atmospheric concentration, with a drop below 50% of their peak concentration by 2100. As a result of the Montreal Protocol, the ozone hole area has remained relatively constant since 1995, with some preliminary evidence of a decline in ozone hole area over the past decade. This image shows snapshots of the maximum ozone hole extent over the southern hemisphere from 1979 to 2019, as outlined in black. With the drop in effective chlorine in the stratosphere, shown here in the gray line, the ozone hole extent, shown in black, has been slowly declining with time. There is still substantial year-to-year variability, which makes it difficult to exactly estimate the effect we've had, but it's clear that the area of the ozone hole has not increased at the rate observed prior to the 1990s. All right, that's all for today. The ozone hole has been a success story of sorts. Although humanity was responsible for the release of substances that caused substantial damage to the natural atmosphere, we identified the problem and acted quickly to limit the emission of those substances. Consequently, we have been able to make some progress reversing the damage we caused, although it'll take several hundred years for the damage to be completely healed. We can hope that there is similar global movement to tackle climate change as well, again with the realization that there are consequences to the gases that we allow to escape into the atmosphere. Today's lecture is the last for this section of the course. Next time, we'll be moving on to talking about water in the atmosphere.